Unbeatable, had this little boy beat him, and I thought then that, you know, we're going to have a superstar.
And in 1957, Bobby Fischer was crowned chess champion of the United States. With just 3 years of competitive play under his belt, and still 2 years from being able to get a driver's license, he had become the most feared player on the continent.
At the early days, I looked forward to it. Matter of fact, it used to be said that Arthur Biscayr was the only player who consistently got good positions against Bobby Fischer. As I began to lose to him, terrible things happened to me. I psyched out.
Sitting across the board with Bobby Fischer, even when you're ahead, you know you're going to lose because he's so great. He will find a way to win the game.
Young Fischer's showing in Yugoslavia in 1958 helped earn him the title of International Grandmaster, making him the youngest player in history to achieve such a feat.
To become a chess grandmaster is like the highest reward, because there are, even as of today, less than 1,000 people in the world out of millions of people that play chess competitively that ever earned that title.
Bobby was now eligible to play in the prestigious Candidates Tournament. The winner of the Candidates would go head-to-head against the two-time world and Soviet champion Mikhail Botvinnik. To make it through a Candidates Tournament without psychological or emotional breakdown was a feat in itself.
So it was 28 games, and so it took place for 1.5 months almost. So it was very difficult competition.
Bobby came 5th at the Candidates Tournament. Spectators and chess experts alike were impressed, but Bobby was disappointed and determined.
Bobby, he was like a Zen monk. I mean, he really studied and spent hours and hours at it.
You'd be at a table eating with him, and the conversation might be about chess. As the conversation drifted away from chess, you'd look over, and Bobby would be there with his little pocket chess set, moving the pieces.
But his obsession with chess was exacting a toll on other facets of his life. When he turned 16, he left school to focus on his game.
I was playing a lot of chess, and I got fed up with the whole thing, you know.
The decision to drop out annoyed his mother. At constant odds with her son, Regina decided to move out.
Although he loved his mother, he kind of felt like she interfered with his career. He called her frequently from my home and certainly cared about her. She basically let him go off and do his chess thing.
Living alone, Bobby focused on chess more than ever, and his social skills suffered accordingly.
He felt very comfortable on the chessboard. He had like a security blanket. But off a chessboard, he was distanced from other people.
Nobody really knows Bobby Fischer. I've met him, I don't know him. I don't think anybody really, truly understands him.
By the time he turned 18, International Grandmaster Bobby Fischer was a 3-time defending American champion. But Bobby's success hadn't come without a price. In addition to being a high school dropout and a borderline recluse, Bobby was quickly gaining a reputation as a hothead. It started when he nearly backed out of the 1960 U.S. Championship because he felt conditions were unsuitable for play.
He started to make demands of all kinds. If he doesn't have the right sound, if he doesn't have the right light, if people are flashing flashbulbs at him, it's going to interrupt his train of thought. It's going to interrupt where he's coming from. And Fischer wanted everything to be right when he played.
And when Fischer's demands went unheeded, he simply refused to play. Some excused his behavior as temperamental genius. Others suspected something else.
Bobby has what's now considered to be Asperger's syndrome. It's considered autism. People who have this syndrome become obsessed, particularly in one area. Music is one, mathematics is another, and then games such as chess.
In 1962, many chess fans, including members of the powerful Soviet contingent, felt Fischer had a legitimate shot at the world title. But he faltered and limped to a 4th-place finish. After leaving, Fischer accused the Soviet players of collusion.
The Soviets tried to rig it every time there was a tournament to gang up on him. In other words, the Soviet players would be losing to one particular guy in the Soviet Union, and everybody would try to hit Bobby.
He registered his protest by boycotting major international tournaments for nearly 3 years. 4 years later, Bobby finally returned to international play. Again, everyone believed he had a chance at the world title. But halfway through his first series of games, Fischer withdrew.
He did not like the conditions. It was a question of an adjourned game. He didn't want to have to play the adjourned game.
His refusal made him ineligible to compete for the World Championship. The title instead went to the Russian powerhouse Boris Spassky. A gregarious, outgoing 32-year-old, Spassky was the rising star of Soviet chess. And with a 4-0-2 career record against Fischer, Spassky was one of the few players Bobby had never beaten. It looked like Bobby Fischer's chances of becoming world champ had evaporated. After squandering yet another chance to compete for the world title, 8-time US champion Bobby Fischer vanished from the international chess scene. In 1968, while Boris Spassky and the Soviets were making another successful run at the World Championship, Bobby was living alone on the West Coast, working sporadically on a book about chess. Then, in April 1970, after a nearly 3-year absence, Bobby Fischer returned to the international chess scene. Unfortunately, Bobby was ineligible for World Championship play. He'd missed the US Championship and the first round of qualifying. The only way Bobby could enter the approaching interzonal tournament was if another American player relinquished his spot.
Pal Benko agreed to give his spot to Bobby, and which was a greatly magnanimous gesture on his part, because he could have played for the tournament, and that's what got Bobby into the interzonal.
Bobby seized the opportunity. What happened next has become the stuff of chess legend. It started when Bobby crushed Soviet Grandmaster Mark Taimanov.
He won the match 6-0. He just wiped this great player Mark Taimanov had. And Mark Taimanov couldn't leave the Soviet Union. And for years, he was censored for not doing better against Fischer.
After vanquishing Taimanov, Fischer disposed of his next 2 opponents. It was astonishing.
You couldn't play these three players, 3 greatest other players in the world, without losing a game.
He would go through these players like a hot knife through butter.
After one of the most impressive runs in modern-day chess, Fischer stood at the threshold of the World Championship that had for so long eluded him. His showdown with Spassky would be held in Reykjavik. With both players in top form, the Western press and the Soviet-run state papers were touting the match as the latest front in the Cold War.
I think this was built up to both sides as a test of systems. I think Lenin said chess is the high expression of the socialist mind.
It was the champ Boris Spassky who was the first to arrive in Iceland. His entourage of chess experts began setting up camp. But it was clear that Spassky wasn't caught up in the Cold War hysteria.
Boris was a much more complicated individual with much more sophisticated political views, quite frankly. And although he was seen in the West as a typical representative of the Soviet system, he didn't see himself as wearing, as they would like to see it, a red shirt. He wasn't there to represent communism.
Fischer, on the other hand, had an almost palpable hatred of both communism and the stable of chess masters the Soviet system produced.
Partly the reason why it was seen as a Cold War battle was that that was how Bobby presented it. He loathed the Soviet Union with a passion. He loathed communism with a passion. He thought that the Soviets had spent years trying to deprive him of what he believed was rightfully his, the World Chess Championship, and he was going to Reykjavik, he was going to Iceland to teach the Soviets a lesson.